Hello and welcome to PSG Review, a show where we have a look into the last week before the international break, which has now started, and our players have once more been sent to all four corners of the earth. It's an oxymoron, of course. Earth doesn't have corners, but it's a Shakespeare's oxymoron, so we let it slide this once. We have a lot to talk about it. It's PSG Review.
You are listening to PSG Review. Here's your host, Mikko.
Thanks for listening. We have a really good show for you, looking into the challenging week that was ahead of this international break. We aren't getting into the details of the Arsenal match anymore because it happened and it's all in the rearview mirror, but of course we cover some of the talking points that have got to do with one Ousmane Dembele. Also, how is the Champions League campaign looking in general and how stressed should we be? Well, the quick answer is not stressed at all. We should not stress about anything in life. Ideally, it doesn't help, but more nuanced analysis a little later in the show. But before that, in a manner of speaking, we go to the French Riviera. PSG travelled for the second away match during 1 week for Sunday night game against Nice. The Champions League weeks are always tricky. That's something that we've seen in the previous seasons as well, but this time there can't be too many complaints in that sense that Nice also had to go to their midweek tour in Italy and they played against Lazio. They were beaten by them, but they had played, I think, on Thursday and we were playing on Tuesday, so we had a little bit of an advantage in terms of that. There was some rotation for PSG. Vitinha was on the bench. More about him later, and in his absence, Fabian Ruiz, of course, was the starter. Dembele was back. More about him too a little later in the show. With him on the front line, there were Bradley Barcola as well as Randall Kolo Muani. Otherwise, pretty much what you would expect. PSG had a lazy start for the match. Really some very poor, uncharacteristically sloppy passes led to dangerous counterattacks by Nice, and PSG wasn't really close to getting the ball into dangerous areas near the Nice goal and our former backup keeper Marcin Bulka. The first third of the match, sort of half an hour, was fairly inconsequential moving off the ball by PSG, mainly in the midfield, sprinkled with few attempts by Nice, some of those genuinely dangerous, but in the end ineffective. But Donnarumma was called to action a few times and he was doing pretty well. What was noteworthy is that quite often PSG is absolutely incredible in controlling the possession in spaces that are non-existent, but now they looked like a bunch of jet-lagged tourists with the finesse of a sedated elephant. There was situation, I feel, where the referee really let down the match as veteran defender of Nice Dante was not able to stay at Hakimi's pace, and in that process he pretty much wholeheartedly kicked our Moroccan on his leg. Painful stuff, and it is true that our players need to control their emotions better, but PSG got 2 yellow cards for complaining about this, and Dante didn't get a yellow card or red card for this kick that could have easily injured Hakimi for quite a while as it came just sort of underneath the knee. Well, that's that. What is more boring than a PSG supporter complaining about the referee, as I've been doing quite a lot recently again. But where was the VAR? Because this certainly was the case, where it could have been checking for a direct red, and it must have. It must have, and Dante knew it also. He was looking pretty stressed when the contact had happened because he knew that he had made an error of judgment, but he used his experience to play it down, and he sort of stayed calm and made it out to be not much, and then, the referee followed the suit. Was it a direct red card, really? Of course, it's a different thing when you're watching the match and you're feeling the emotions of it. But in hindsight, was it the red card? Well, it's not really for me to say. I have seen red cards from much less, let's say that. But Jérémy Brichard, the referee, is the same guy who gave Neymar yellow for his dribbles. And he has a bit of a previous with us, so it all puts it also in context. And whether red or not, it should have been dealt better. I think that he didn't do very well. And I really think that red would have been very justified because Dante wasn't really very close to hitting the ball. Actually, it was a very audacious attempt because, and I say this with all the love because I'm as a person, I'm older than Dante, but he's a 40-year-old man who is trying to outrun or catch up Achraf Hakimi, who is quite a quick guy in his prime. So it was never going to happen, was it? But nevertheless, he gave it his all and he kicked as hard as he sort of could from that position as it was, and it came just under the knee. Nowhere near the ball. There was no chance to hitting the ball. I think that it was quite dangerous. Whether he wasn't meaning it, but it was quite dangerous, and I don't think that the red card would have been out of question. But maybe we've talked too much about it already. Nice took their opportunity pretty much soon after that, and it was 1-0 for the home team, which was also the result at the halftime. Very poor 45 minutes by PSG, and during the halftime, Luis Enrique chose to call Kolo Muani to the bench and put Lee Kang on instead. It's not looking great for Kolo Muani, is it? His profile just doesn't seem to find its place in our formation. It's really a shame, and things can always change. It's really unfortunate because this is just not looking great for him. There's now even talk that he could be on sale even as soon as in January during that window. Well, of course, it's one thing to have him on sale, but will there be buyers? Well, I think there will be buyers because everybody can see that he's a decent player and he delivers much better for the national team, and everybody knows that there's a system where he can shine, and perhaps something like Bundesliga where he was before coming back to Ligue 1 and PSG. Maybe that's something that will work better for him. Maybe the style of play there just suits him better as it did when he was in Frankfurt. Who knows, but obviously, and this is really the problem, the amount that PSG has paid for him quite recently, sort of just over 1 year ago, will be next to impossible to recoup. So whether he can find a new club or not will largely depend on what type of loss PSG is willing to make on this deal. And the question is, should PSG make the loss in this? Is his price going to go up or down? Is the loss going to be more or less sooner you sell him? Of course, he also has a high salary, so they need to make their own calculations. I don't really have a password for that Excel spreadsheet to see what the budget and looks like, what's the balance there, but they will know better. Well, I guess on top of the fact that PSG will have to decide what kind of loss they are willing to make, or are they also would have to admit the miscalculation that was his recruitment. I don't know, I always like Kolo Muani, and I do like him, and I want to see him do well in Paris, but it really seems very, very difficult for whatever reason. Back to Nice. The second half started far better for us, and this is something that you have to acknowledge and give credit to Luis Enrique. He can impact the match in the middle of it. You remember during the eras of Pochettino or Galtieri, it was like how the match started, that was more or less how it ended. There just weren't solutions, or perhaps they lacked the authority in the star-studded squad, but either way it felt at times like a punishment to watch those matches to the bitter end when things were just not working. I mean, I did watch them to the end. I'm not a Marseille supporter who leaves the stadium early, but there was a sense of dread involved, that's for sure. Well, PSG raised their heads up and refocused, and results were visible to us all. Soon enough, Nuno Mendes smashed the ball into the net. It was one of his less clean shots, I will give you that, but it was a goal nonetheless, and it was 1-1 at that point. The second half had better intensity, and there were good opportunities for PSG. Far fewer dangerous counters, if any, for Nice, whose low block appeared far less impenetrable. Several dangerous situations for us, and really it felt that if there's a goal coming, we were the more likely scorer of it. It seems that in particular it was Lee Kang-in whose introduction had made all the difference. Marcin Bulka, our former backup keeper, was doing really well, catching all the balls that were coming in. Vitinha was also brought in, as was Asensio towards the later parts of the match, and Vitinha is still not quite ready in my eyes, and it's alarming that he's been rushed in. Or perhaps he isn't, but maybe he's just struggling with his form, which isn't really like him, in my opinion. He got a good shot towards the end, but fundamentally too close to Bulka, who managed to stop it. Nice was really out of answers at this point as the match was nearing its closure. They were hanging in there hoping for the referee to confirm them this draw, but PSG was pushing pretty relentlessly. in the dying moments, there was another questionable refereeing decision if one wasn't enough, as Dembele was brought down in the box, but that resulted with Nice free kick. Look, whatever. I feel fatigued and have no energy to complain too much about this. I think it was very poor refereeing, in my opinion, in that two of the most questionable decisions, which both in and of themselves could have changed the match entirely into our advantage, went blatantly to Nice's benefit. And not just that, but in actual fact, the situation that, in my biased opinion, should have been our penalty shot ended up being free kick for Nice. And the situation that certainly could have been red card, but at the very least yellow card for Dante, ended up with not any kind of card for him, and only 2 yellow cards for PSG players, which, mind you, they will pile up, and at some point of the season, probably both of these players will miss a match at some point, and we can't choose which match it is going to be when they have too many yellow cards. This can happen, so it all counts, even if it might feel like one yellow card is not that serious. Last time when we played against Rennes, there were also 2 decisive and perhaps a little unclear refereeing choices, but they went even, and that feels more realistic. That to me is, I actually thought, and I think I said that in the episode back then, that refereeing was pretty good because he had a sort of line that he had chosen, and then he followed that. There was a level, and it was consistent. There was consistency in it. But this Jeremy Prichard has always felt a little bit more vibes-based, and it seems so juvenile. It seems so childish to say that, oh, there's some kind of a conspiracy against PSG by him or by anybody else. Who knows, maybe it's just a long list of coincidences and misunderstandings that have happened where we are sort of like coming with the shorter end of the stick. And mind you, also, it has to be said that perhaps I'm not paying the same attention to all the times when he was doing a good job. Let's not attack individuals, but I'm not hoping to see him refereeing our matches anytime soon. Well, PSG was good in the second half, but if you are not able to finish the match to our advantage, then the possessions and the shots on target, then very slender consolation indeed. Basically, we wasted the first 45 minutes, and that's the issue. Incidentally, the same could be said about the match against Arsenal. So the overall resume of the week is 2 bad first halves and 2 reasonably good second halves. But essentially, neither one of those second halves was enough to undo the damage of those first 45 minutes in those respective matches. The squad looks a little tired, and the injuries have made life complicated in general. Vitinha wasn't starting the match, and against Arsenal he was very forgettable, which is not really like him at all, and that played a huge part in that battle for us losing. I'm not saying that we would have definitely won it or even done better, but I think the team would have done better if he was more informed, but he's clearly not 100%. We have seen that because when he is 100%, he does have an impact. We are very familiar with his abilities. It's not like him to not be on that type of level. So who's to say what would have happened if he was more informed? But there's no excuses. It's a team sport, but of course we were lacking that final push when Vitinha wasn't at his best and Dembele was not there at all, and few other players weren't quite delivering. That was the result, the defeat in London. More about Dembele in a moment, but now we're talking about Vitinha. To me, it seems absolutely pointless and even counterproductive for him to go to the Portuguese national team for the next few weeks. He undoubtedly will go there, but what the point of that travel is, it seems less clear, at least to me. It seems more likely prolonging his recovery, which is somehow not happening, because there's no rest. It's difficult to recover if there's no rest. He has struggled since the last international break when he got injured, and this new one, I don't think that it will help. I think he should stay at the training center, but that won't happen because no player will want to ever say no to a selection unless there's a clear injury and no way around it. That's what it looks like. But realistically, will he be playing much for the national team? I would imagine they have enough midfielders to give him a break, so why not take that break in Paris? It's a bit of a shame, and I don't really blame the players, but I will note that I think it's important to say that when they criticize, and very rightfully in my opinion, very rightfully they criticize the amount of matches they are being asked to play in any given season, especially now, they should also take the responsibility to say, hey, these Nations League matches or international friendlies, they're all well and good, but I need to prioritize my form, and perhaps it's best if I sit these ones out. This is not, however, happening, certainly not publicly, although what do I know about the conversations that take place? But what I do know is that more often players who could use an extra day or two just to relax will choose to travel and fly and then to even sit on the bench in another country rather than to say that, hey, can I just sit this one out? They also need to be grown-ups, in my opinion, and bear the responsibility, because the amount of matches that they are, it's just going to increase until some kind of breaking point, which we might not even be very far from, because a lot of players are injuring themselves. So the players also need to say that this is enough, and of course their union, FIFPro and others, should really consider taking some kind of action. And if they do, I think I'm going to be very much aligned with that, because I like football. I like watching football, but I like watching good quality football. I like quality of football more than the quantity of football, although I do watch also football that with a lot lower quality. Of course, there's all sorts of football that is enjoyable, but let me just say that I think on this highest level, we should really look into the quality more than the quantity, and that's not happening at the moment. I'm not attacking the players too much, don't get me wrong. It's difficult to say why the team, PSG, that is looking like it sort of lacks energy. It's a lot of fatigue. It's the amount of matches. Perhaps many players have been playing big matches during the summer. There's been tournaments, there's been Euros, there's been Copa America, there's been Olympics, and very little holiday. They don't get a lot of holiday. They don't get a lot of downtime to just sort of relax and even, let's say, for argument's sake, even sort of forget the football for a few days. I don't think that happens, because even then they are like going to the gym and practicing and so on. It becomes very athletically competitive, this football. We're no longer living the days of the 90s or early 2000s or so on and so forth, where you could have this kind of like guys. I think maybe Neymar was kind of like last of his kind on a very high level, who was also like, you know, taking his enjoyment of life, for better or worse. Of course, I think that a lot of that was also a reason why he's playing now in Saudi Arabia and not in Europe. But there's a lot of matches and very little holiday, and now we have 6 more matches left in the Champions League campaign. Last year or the years before that would have been the entire group stage. Now we played a few matches already. We have 6 more matches to left. We have like a full group stage worth of matches still to play. And then after that, if you don't finish in the top 8, you have additional 2 matches left. More about the Champions League later. But then it's also to remember, when it talks about amount of matches that we have, that there is this Club World Cup next summer, which seems like actual insanity, as we are busy replacing the quality of football with quantity of football. I'd really rather have fewer matches, like I said, but have our players looking like they're up for it. I can't say that this current slump is definitely because of it, the amount of football that is being played, but it would make a lot of sense. It's difficult to separate them entirely, at the very least. This is a topic that is currently talked about quite a lot. I think it's an important one, but it will also require a little bit of action as well, not just talk. The Dembele debate has been raging ever since the eve of the Arsenal match and the news that he wasn't part of the travelling PSG squad. A lot of talk, not many reliable facts, and yet vast amounts of opinions as per usual. This certainly would be a topic that would make people talk a lot. There was basically a story that there had been some issue and then a disagreement between Dembele himself and Luis Enrique. Was it tardiness on the player's part, for which there is a precedent from his former club, of course, essentially? Had he just been late and been unapologetic about it, or perhaps not apologetic enough for Enrique's liking? Was it about his selfishness on the pitch with a few solo efforts instead of passing the ball to a better placed teammate? Difficult to know, especially considering that the talk on these streets had just been how he is seen as a key player and that he should score more and believe in himself when it comes to scoring goals. This had just been talked about at length, so seems unlikely that it would have backfired quite to that extent. When it comes to forwards, the thing about them that we don't always want to admit is that they do need to also be selfish. When you're talking about goal scorers, they need to be selfish because they need to want to score goals. And sometimes it so happens that it means that they are not passing the ball to somebody who could score a goal. And if they can score a goal, it's not a problem. But if they miss, then it becomes a talking point, and this is something that has happened a couple of times to Dembele, and it did happen many times to Mbappe also. But then, of course, Mbappe scored also a lot of goals, so we kind of forgot that conversation as soon as that. But there's still mention of many times when he didn't pass the ball to Neymar or somebody else. The backdrop of all this conversation about Dembele is that last season and 6 seasons before that, in the old PSG, before even Luis Enrique, we had a player, sometimes more than one, who was far more selfish than what Dembele has thus far displayed. Like mentioned, it is perfectly conceivable that Luis Enrique would like to ensure that we won't be held hostage by anyone's ego ever again. Certainly not during his reign, and it would appear that Nasser Al-Khelaifi as well as Luis Campos have got his back when it comes to this. There are lessons learned and fair play. Dembele is our number 10, probably the biggest name in the team. Arguably, you could say Donnarumma is up there with him, perhaps even Marquinhos, depending on who you ask or where you ask. If you ask in Brazil, or Hakimi, a lot of people know and like him. But I would say that as far as the name recognition goes, not many meet the standards created by Ousmane Dembele as far as our current players go. So it could have been a bit of a warning example also to the whole squad. What it was, of course, was also a good reminder that Dembele, is actually a pretty important player for us, because against Arsenal, when he was missing in action, we were trying to get the ball up pretty much exclusively on the left side of the pitch, where we had Nuno Mendes and Bradley Barcola, of course, with the help of our midfield and other squad members, but the right side was pretty calm. There was not a lot of action there, like really very calm altogether, because the link between Hakimi and Dembele was not there. It wasn't available for that match. All the automatism and everything else that comes with it, they are reading each other's game pretty well. So there's a lot that those two give to PSG when they are there battling together for a common cause. And I think that the match against Arsenal was a kind of like, it was a reminder of it. Well, was it all worth it, penalizing Dembele? Well, the answer is that we don't know 100% what he was penalized for, so it's difficult to say if it was proportionate or not. Perhaps it was, perhaps it wasn't, but the thing is that if you give someone a harsher than usual outcome for a minor discretion in order to make a broader point for the whole team, sort of what I'm talking about, like a warning example, a sort of storm warning, that is always unfair. That is always unfair because you are not penalizing the error, you're trying to establish a future deterrent so the next time you don't have to take the action. So for that individual player, it is, for all intents and purposes, always a little bit unfair. We don't know if this was the case, so I'm not really speculating on that. I'm just sort of talking around it. If there's a distinction between those two things, I don't know. Well, this is now done. There's no time machine to change it anyway, and I think undoubtedly we would have been better with him against Arsenal. I think so, but really, realistically, I don't know if his presence in and of itself would have pushed us over the line to be the winners or even being able to come back with 1 point. Possibly. You never know. Arsenal was very good, of course they were, but despite that, only the goals count, so getting one in there would have really created a new situation for that match. So much time has gone now that I won't get too much into it. But there were situations where we could have, some say should have, and I count myself among those people, had a penalty shot. But then again, the handball rules are being as confusing as they are. The referee can basically do what they please. All I can say is that I would have automatically assumed that it would have been one penalty shot if it was in our end, and I would have never even complained about too much about that decision because it just seemed like something that would have happened if the ball touches your hand and all these other things that were happening. But we were already complaining about one referee, so let's not make all of our admittedly pretty poor matches about the refereeing decisions. But they also still count. They still count, and it felt very much this week that those big decisions sort of went against us. Being beaten by Arsenal at this point, it's not really that deep, it's not that serious. It's one of the best teams in Europe, and their project is several seasons ahead of ours, which is just 1 year old essentially. That's hardly catastrophic to not be able to win them this time of the season. And like I said, it wasn't a great match, not by a long shot by PSG, but it wasn't the end of the world either. The Champions League is neither won nor lost in October. It's a very long race until the end of the spring, whoever makes it that far. Our remaining league phase opponents weren't too convincing either. It wasn't just us. So basically, let's have a quick look at what happened with all those teams that we still have to play against in this league phase of the Champions League. PSV, which is our next opponent, they were playing against Sporting, Portuguese side Sporting, and it was 1-1. So they drew against Sporting. Manchester City, okay, they did beat Slovan Bratislava 4-0, but that doesn't tell us all that much because, of course, Manchester City is supposed to beat Slovan Bratislava. Bayern, however, they were beaten by Aston Villa 1-0. Benfica got better of Atletico Madrid 4-0. That is quite interesting because that will be a very important match for us. Atletico Madrid, we are soon looking into the numbers, the predicted points, so on and so forth, what might be needed to get into the knockouts or top 8 or so on and so forth. And basically this Atletico match I think will be very important for us. Then Stuttgart, they drew against Sparta Prague 1-1, but they were really struggling. I was watching that match before. It was happening just before our match against Arsenal, and I saw most of it, and Stuttgart were really lucky to get a 1-1 score against Sparta Prague, and Salzburg were thoroughly beaten by Brest, of course. That match was 0-4, and we have already beaten Brest this season. Of course, they have a great European campaign. Well, I like seeing that. I have absolutely nothing against Brest. They're another Ligue 1 club. There are other Ligue 1 clubs that I'm not, wishing well, but Brest certainly, I'm all for them. Why not go and do as good campaign as they possibly can? So they did beat Salzburg, which is also a club that we are going to be playing later on in this campaign. So basically, there was only one winner, and that was Manchester City out of those teams that we are still be playing, and quite a few were defeated or drawing against teams that, I don't want to speak ill of anybody, and I certainly don't want to sound arrogant, but we should be better than Sparta Prague. And if we're not better than Sparta Prague, then we have to consider is it our place to even be playing in the knockout matches and whatever. On top of Bayern Munich, which was beaten by Aston Villa, like I said, also Real Madrid was beaten by Lille, another French team that I have absolutely no particular problem with. So it was a great thing to see Real Madrid beaten by them. But do you think that the fans of, say, Real Madrid are letting go of their Champions League dreams just because of this one match? Probably not. And of course, there's a different context to it, and they have a different type of team and a different type of project. But at the end of the day, I think that the way that a lot of the PSG fans have reacted to this one match, I think it was a little bit. It was a little bit more than that was necessary. I think there was a little bit of an overreaction there in the mix, which of course I understand. There's emotions involved. People are struggling with all sorts of things. Somebody's unhappy at work or having difficulties at school or studies or relationships or whatever. And then comes a football match where millionaires don't really seem to mind how the match goes. And this is the team and club that you support bearing the badge that you care so much about. And then they are not really giving that much to it, or sort of like certainly not for the first 45 minutes. Of course, I understand if that makes you a little bit angry and upset, even furious, but it's also something for us to maybe learn not to project too much of our own grievances on the shoulders of these millionaires. But we know that we need an improvement. We need a very concrete improvement. Of course we do. I'm not downplaying it. I'm not like trying to normalize subpar performances. I think it's very important that the team is going to be playing better in the future. But we do need players to recover from injuries as well, and we also need to have a lot of patience. I think that we've been quite unlucky, especially with the injuries. I think we've been quite unlucky because on top of the players who are actually injured at the moment, we are also basically having almost a handful of players who are only just coming out of an injury and they don't really seem to be in full form. This match against Arsenal, it was not the final. It wasn't actually that very important match at all. It's not a great thing to be beaten, but the estimate is that, and there is a account on Twitter called Football Meets Data, and they have calculated the probabilities of this league phase in terms of what is required for the top 8 finish, and then also what is required for the top 24 finish, which would qualify you to the additional round to play for the spot in the round of 16. So the top 8 don't need to bother with that additional round, and they will go directly to the knockouts as they are. And that top 8 finish would be ideal, of course. I'm not too bothered wearing that top 8, but within there, even at 8, to be honest. And according to their model, like I said, this was Football Meets Data on Twitter. According to their model, the way that they have calculated it, the expected threshold for top 8 is 15 or 16 points. Both of those are as likely. So let's say 16. Let's say that if we beat PSV, Eindhoven, Salzburg and Stuttgart, which I think we should, it's not guaranteed, but I think we should beat PSV, Salzburg and Stuttgart. And of course, then we already have those 3 points from Girona. These are the 4 matches that on paper should have been the easier ones. Then we have 12 points. So basically, that leaves us with needing 3 to 4 points, 4 points to have 16. And this needs to come from the matches against Atletico Madrid, who was just beaten thoroughly by Benfica. Manchester City, which undoubtedly will be difficult, is one of the favorite teams to win the whole thing, but that's at home at Parc des Princes, and they won't have Rodri, who in my books might just be one of the most important players right now in football. It's such a game changer. So that match also, by the way, is late January, so it's a long way away. A lot can happen. And then there's Bayern. Not an easy one, but I feel like it should be possible on a good day to get something. So basically, if we get full points from the 4 matches that I mentioned, PSV, Salzburg, Stuttgart and Girona we already have. And then we need 1 win and 1 draw from Atletico Madrid, Bayern Munich and Manchester City. It's not easy. It's certainly far from being a safe bet. It's not guaranteed. But I do think that we should be able to compete against Atletico Madrid and then get, if we can get another point somehow. I think it's possible. If these calculations are anything to go by, the top 8 is well within our reach. I think so. It's not easy, like I said, and we do need to improve. But we will also get some of our players back. By the time we are playing the last couple of matches, including the match against Manchester City, we will have at least players like Gonzalo Ramos and things like that. So that is there to be taken, the top 8. And for the places between 9 and 24, the estimation is that you would get into that group with 9 or 10 points. So let's say 10 points. We have 3 points now, so if we can't get 7 more points from the next 6 matches, it will be very easy to say that we have absolutely no business to even dream of knockouts. The problems in that scenario will far supersede anything else. So that's basically what I mean when I say I'm not the biggest fan of this new system. I don't think it's massively exciting yet. It might be later, and it's perfectly foreseeable that if all goes as planned, we will be nervous in the last match days for the top 8 finish, but so far nothing has made me feel like this is a better way of doing things. And it's also possible that the top 8 chances have already gone before that match, but in that case, it doesn't make that much difference. I said that before, and I will say that again. If we had a team like Arsenal against us in the old-fashioned group stage, we would need to beat them to top the group and get an easier opponent in the round of 16. And losing the first match would mean that we have some time, a few months at most, to figure out things and ensure a win and a goal difference against them and others in that group. I think that was pretty exciting, but perhaps there's a difference. Perhaps that's, for us PSG supporters, exciting because somehow magically we have always, well, mostly been in the group of death or some such. Perhaps some of the other clubs couldn't relate to that as they got to steamroll through the group stage towards the spring. There's been a certain amount of criticism that has been aimed at our team and its members, various members. We have already covered some of those talking points, but it's fair to add a few angles to this conversation, I feel. First of all, Warren Zaire-Emery hasn't admittedly had his best period of football in Paris, but to attack him like some have seemed very unfair because we have forgotten, perhaps we have, that this young man, aged only 18 years, has already been in this conversation for a few years and he has been praised. The expectations have been raised, and of course then the human nature is such that some will want to drag him down from the very pedestal that they have lifted him up to. The thing about him is that he gave us something to that effect that we forgot his age. But also then, when he gave a good performance, we overlooked that it was very good because it wasn't as amazing as some of his best performances had been. We started to expect that he's going to have a world-class night every night. We got used to it all, perhaps even a bit numb, and now we are unimpressed when he's playing on a good but not an amazing standard. And yes, there will be further fluctuation in his level as well. Some matches aren't good. We've had some matches that haven't been very good, and that's very normal. It's very normal for a young player. It's very normal for any player, and it's very normal for him too. Because also he's been multitasking. He just now finished his studies. He got his bac, as they say in France. What would it be? A high school diploma. These vary in different countries, but most of us have something similar. So while being a top-level athlete, he's also had to take care of this business, of his studies, education. Mind you, he even had to postpone writing his exams because, well, the Euros, so his youth isn't like mine was. Probably yours neither. And then the Euros must have been a huge disappointment for him too, because he also wanted to go to Olympics, but he was selected to Euros. It was very difficult for him to say no to Euros, and then Deschamps didn't give him even a 1 minute in a very unimpressive French team in those Euros. So he didn't get to play in the Euros, but he had to be ready for that, and then he was not able to play in the Olympics, which he would have wanted, and all of that, he didn't get a lot of holiday either, and that, so it's quite normal that these things happen. There's been enough emotional up and down for him, and with age and experience, the level will probably even out and he will be just a great player. So I believe, and the same applies to guys like Jean Neves or remarkable Barcola and tremendous Mendes. These things, they happen, and we just need to be patient, and especially, like said, for the younger players, we must allow them to have good days and bad days, and in the end, we trust that they will deliver. And fingers crossed they will. Well, when the results haven't been what we would have ideally want them to be, also the coach, of course, is getting his share of criticism, and it doesn't help that Luis Enrique has been in full combat mode with the French press ever since his arrival. There now is some murmur around the rigidity of his system and how little freedom there is within it for individual players to express themselves, that players wouldn't be very happy with it, that they would feel frustrated and confined in that system. Look, what can I say? We want a strong leader who can impose his ideas and who has ideas. I mean, haven't we seen enough managers who struggle with one or the other, whether they struggle with the ideas part or whether they struggle with the sort of personality that push them through and charisma, whatever is needed within the locker room. Paris is not an easy place to go and coach, but it's also the first time during the QSI era, at least, that the manager has the full support of the higher ups. They stand behind him, at least until they don't. But so far, so good. And I think that is what enables Luis Enrique to do what he's trying to do. We no longer have coaches whose job it is to make superstar look even better. But this time, we have a project that attempts to push forward on its own merit and not the merit of another club where those players might have played before or winning another competition that we haven't yet won. Will it work? Well, we can only see it down the line, but it's worth giving it a shot. And do I think that Luis Enrique is perfectly flawless? No, I don't think anyone is, but he's a good coach with big ideas, and while he can be stubborn sometimes, I think that just goes with the profile that is needed for a coach perhaps. It would be maybe better if he was a little bit more flexible, but at the same time, we need a coach who has ideas and will pursue them. Sometimes it's just like that the person that you need to have a certain characteristics, even flaws in their personality. I don't know if that's going too far calling them that, but the personality type that he has, it's not an accident that he is where he is at the moment in the world of football. Mikel Arteta, for example, he took over Arsenal duties 5 years ago in December, almost 5 years ago, and bit by bit he's been able to build something. Jurgen Klopp wasn't an instant success in Liverpool despite having had a good success in Dortmund before that, and even Pep Guardiola, who had been in Barcelona and Bayern Munich before that, he didn't put City into the Champions League final as soon as he stepped in. Things will take time. You can't freestyle success in football. You can have a fluke and momentum, but even those are usually built from ground up, and even more so that needs to happen when you're building a project. And this is what we are busy with. It's time for the international break once again. It has already started. Who knows who will be injured once the players return to PSG at the end of it. It's the most nerve-wracking time of the season. Well, one of them at least. I think all of these times of the international breaks always are. After the break, we have 2 home matches to make up for the last 2 away matches. First one will be against Strasbourg on 19th of October. That's Saturday night local time. And then a few days later, the same place, the same time, Parc des Princes, we have PSV Eindhoven. And that is one of those matches that only 3 points will do. And it should be doable. What else? We also are fast approaching the last month of recovery as it has been predicted for Gonzalo Ramos, so he should be back in the squad if all goes well mid-November, but of course we don't know how long it will take for him to find his form. I hope it will be very quick, but we shall see. I can't wait to see him. I have to be honest, one of the most destabilizing things to me this season has been his absence, since I had been so looking forward to seeing him taking charge, and I still think it will happen. The less good news is that Presnel Kimpembe's return seems, how to put it diplomatically, less certain, and it's hard to feel too optimistic about it because he gets to the practice together with the team and then again not. It feels sometimes like it's 1 step forward and 1.5 steps back, then an additional stumble, then a motivational social media post about the strength of his metal, which undoubtedly they exist, and then we start again, back to the square one. I just wish him all the best in the world. I hope that his on-pitch career hasn't ended yet. Our Presco, may he be back somehow. I don't even know how, but somehow. Positive news, just to mention, Sergio Rico is back playing football. He has a new club in Qatar. I really didn't expect him to play professionally anymore, I have to be honest, ever again. So this is really beautiful news. This is really uplifting news. The only goalkeeper in PSG history to have played us into the Champions League final. That's historical stuff. That's a great memory for me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. My name is Mikko. This is PSG Review. Thank you for listening. Find and follow me and PSG Review online on various platforms. Twitter, it's at PSG Review Pod, and on Instagram and TikTok, it is simply at PSG Review. Take care, and until next time, peace.